Textile of the Month series, January 2023, and this will be Min-tsudure. Min actually refers to the Ming, M-I-N-G, dynasty of China, and tsuzure normally refers to a tapestry weave. But what exactly is a tapestry weave? There are many different versions of that in Japan, and we'll be touching briefly on tsuzure as a whole category of tapestry, but for this program, we're focusing on this particular style called Min-tsudure. And in a later program, probably next year with the samples, we'll go ahead and focus in greater depth on what is called tsuzure, which is you're seeing a sample of that now, or tsuzure, which is fingernail type tapestry weave. And we'll touch on that briefly today, but more in another program. This is a phoenix I have posted online right now as part of the Fukusa lecture that I did a few days ago, and you'll be able to view that online also. So let's take a couple of detailed look at it. One of the things you'll notice about tsuzure ori is that it's woven in islands. And so if you'll see this sort of beige portion of the phoenix's face is all woven back and forth, back and forth. The feathers are back and forth, building up, sculpting little islands of color with a warp face thread. And again, this is a detail from the lower section. And you can see the detail work around the edges of the islands. Now, to prepare to get started for an image, the first thing you're going to do is to paint the background color, the cartoon for it. And that's done by sketching an outline, as you see here, filling in with a range of gouaches or pigments, so that basically you're doing the underdrawing or the prototype for what you're about to weave. These are basically the same pigments used in our dye work also. They're called gandyo. Now, once all of the colors are determined by the artist or the designer, then the highly skilled experts are going to put together the colors. These are all synthetic dyes that they're using here, but they are really incredibly skilled at matching just about any color. The threads themselves are dyed in the skein form, and notice the tool that he's using for turning the threads. This is a very efficient way to get even unblemished colors in your skeins. And this section will give you a notion of the wide range of colors that they have pulling from the different threads, like a library of colors. These are then rolled onto the quills for your shuttle, and this will give you an idea of some of the shuttles. This type of smaller shuttle is called a hina shuttle, okay, hinakeshi, and it's much smaller than a normal shuttle, and it's pointed at the end to allow you to pick up the threads as you see here. So this weaver, you can see, is sculpting little sections. The thread is not running selvage to selvage. She's sculpting smaller islands of color as she builds up. Here's another weaver working. You can see the cartoon in the back. In this case, her cartoon is just the outline. And then to the side, she has the actual color cartoon to make sure that she's getting the right colors in there. Notice how she is tamping down with her fingers, but fingernails. She's also tamping down with a comb. And you can see she keeps the extra shuttles and threads out of the way that she's not working with, has to constantly refer back to the cartoon to make sure that everything's correct. And again, verify from time to time what's happening. You'll notice that she's weaving with the back side up so she can have the knots and the hanging down threads on that side. But in order to check her work, she'll put a mirror underneath. Some weavers will use a hand mirror, as she is. Many other weavers will simply have a large pane of mirror behind that stays stationary. So again, constantly referring back to the cartoon, making sure everything's in place, tamping down as necessary. Now, what she's weaving is what's referred to as tsuzure or tsuzure. It's heavier weight than we'll be discussing in a moment. It tends to be a bit rigid, ties a good knot. Now, on the left here, you can see her cartoon with the actual colors and her library of threads she's pulling from. One of the things you'll notice too, if you might be tackling this, is a little bit of an investment to have so many of the shuttles available. And so the way that I've prepared the shuttles that I sell, it's very easy to pop the quill in and out, so that actually you can have a library of quills to the side and only be required to have 1 or 2 shuttles. It lessens the investment required. But here again, you can see that she's picking very carefully the warp threads up, tamping them down with her fingernails. In the technique called tsuzure, fingernail tapestry, the weaver actually has her fingernails san, much like a comb. So you'll notice that they were using combs to tamp down, and I also do carry those combs on my website. They use the combs, combs, I should say. They use the combs to tamp down, but they'll also use their saw tooth, their comb-like fingernails to push the threads in position. And that's what you're seeing. Now, that's not normally done in Min-tsudure, but it is done in tsuzure. So going back in history a bit, let me back up just a tiny bit. I talked past that, but just a speck. This is the shosoin in Nara, and it's the old repository. It's one of the oldest continually in use buildings in the world, and it's part of our World Heritage Sites. Okay, so within that are stored many of these older tapestry weaves from China, and even Coptic tapestry weaves. You'll see in the center here, in the very center here, you'll see some Coptic weaves, okay? At the top, you'll see, and the left, you'll see some Chinese tapestry weaves. And again, what we're familiar with as Chinese robes also were often done tapestry. They were also embroidered, but tapestry was also a common method. And these are wall hangings that were done, all in tapestry weave. So now we're getting into what is called the Min-tsudure, again, Ming Dynasty style tapestry weaving. And one of the things that characterizes it is it's a bit lighter weight than what we saw earlier with the fingernail tapestry. And what's typical of Min-tsudure is it has this outline. Often the outline is black, often it's gold or other colors, and sometimes it's not there at all, or it's in spot areas. But again, the key factor that makes Min-tsudure is the fact that it's much lighter weight, a bit more airy, and also often has the outlines. So this is an excellent example of Min-tsudure. Then going into some of the weaving techniques, you'll see that, of course, like any ballast weave, flat weave, you simply have the warps moving up and down to allow you to do the weave. Keep in mind, these are weft-faced, tapestry is a weft-faced weave. Here you see within the normal hon-tsuzure, the sculpting effect, the island effect of building up areas of color and weave. Okay, and here, this particular artist is using her colored cartoon to ensure that she's getting all of the threads in the right positions. And you can see this is a very time-consuming process. You can see the comb on the left. As I mentioned, we did the fukusa talk a couple of days ago, so I wanted to show as an example a tapestry weave fukusa also, and how it's used as a gift cover. And so this is a hon-tsuzure tapestry. It has a lot more solid, substantial look to it than Min-tsudure has. These are Min-tsudure weaves in tapestry weave. They're often done in pictorial form. They'll often look like paintings, as a matter of fact. So this is one of the banners from my collection, okay? And you can see the delicate detail of the birds, the outline in gold of the feathers, okay? Again, typically Min-tsudure, and again, a lighter weight. You'll notice this one is not warped face as the hon-tsuzure. So the tapestry weave for Min-tsudure isn't always warped face. It can be, but again, being a lighter weight, the weft threads, excuse me, I said warped face, I meant weft. There's not always a weft face. In a hon-tsuzure piece, the weft are all packed down really, really tight so the weft doesn't show at all. In Min-tsudure, that can happen if it's a very lightweight thread, but more often the warp does show in the background. In this case, you can see, let's get in there closer. This one is primarily weft face, okay, unlike the one we just saw. We're back to the Min-tsudure again. You can see she's using a comb to tamp down. We do that in Min-tsudure also. And again, these are things I carry on my website. Okay, and so again, sculpting, when you are covering a large area, it's flat. It's going as if you were doing a flat weave or a weft-faced weave. And then you sculpt little section by little section. Now, in the sculpting aspect of it, you have to be careful because you can build up into a mountain and come to greet it, but you can't undercut something when you're weaving. You can't go back and fit in. So it's a really well thought out choreography of accumulated shapes to build up as you progress in the weave. And you'll notice here this slat-like effect, the gap here, I should say slit effect within the weave. So this brown section in a Min-tsudure and a weft face is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, brown to brown, and tamped down with that comb or fingernail, but with the comb to make it nice and packed. Well, when these two colors meet, like the white, you get a huge slit in it. And that's one of the characteristics of tapestry weave. But the problem with that is that's a gap. Now, in some cultures, that's fine and acceptable. The Japanese, as a general rule, don't like that. So every now and again, you'll see a weft thread will cross over and grab hold of the other color section to pull the slit closed, okay? And that's typical of both Min-tsudure and Min-tsudure. Okay, and this piece, you'll see us flip it over in just a minute to see the finished piece. Okay, so again, very beautiful pine trees on an island. And then if you flip it over, you'll see what the back looks like. Okay. And you can see you can do all sorts of gradations of colors, as you see with the purples and so forth. So let's go on to the piece that I had at the very beginning slide, and one from my collection. This is Min-tsudure. I'm not sure if it comes across in the slide or not, but again, it has a much lighter, airier look. And if I take that whole thing and pull it inside out so that you can look at the back of it, this will give you a notion of what that's like. You may be able to see that there's a little bit more looseness to how the outlines are, because that's on the back and the shuttle is carrying over section to section. So it's not quite as crisp an outline as you might see on the front side. Okay, and same thing here. Oh, in this case, what I've done, I forgot why I put this slide in there. I wanted to show you how airy this piece is. So I slipped a pair of Fiskar scissors under it. Can you see the orange handle? I wanted you to see how transparent that the gold section is. Now, the birds themselves are packed a bit tighter. They're not quite as open and loose. But again, this is sort of an extreme. I want to emphasize the airiness and lightness of Min-tsudure relative to the other types. So what about fake ones, okay? Or let's say not fake, but ones that borrow the aesthetic of Min-tsudure. This is a beautiful piece based on everything I've told you so far. It would be easy to identify as Min-tsudure. It has the nice color gradations. It has the islands of color. It has the black outlines, but it's not Min-tsudure. Okay, so here again, if you pull it open and look at the back, you can see that the threads are carried, but notice that the black thread is not sculpted for that island. It's carried from this section all the way across until it stops on the left, and then back again and back again. So there are no islands of color, okay? And then and see the same thing is happening with the gold. The gold starts on the right, goes all the way across until it needs to turn around and back and forth and back and forth. So it is not a tapestry weave, although it has the same beauty of one. It's not nearly as time-consuming to weave either, although it takes its own skill. So another detail of this, detailed look, perhaps now you can better appreciate how the threads are carried across. Notice that the black threads themselves are not continuous. It's not as if we're starting at the base of the leaf and going along as an outline, as you would see in Min-tsudure. Min-tsudure, that would be one thread. In this type of weaving, though, because the threads are traveling back and forth across the back and floating, they give you this stair-stepped, woven look as opposed to the solid line you see in Min-tsudure. Okay. So here's another very beautiful example. It sort of qualifies everything we'd said to date, except again, notice how the edges are stair-stepped. Okay, these outlines are stair-stepped. Very beautiful weave, though. For all intents and purposes, it looks like a tapestry weave, especially when you see these various islands. But again, the proof is in turning it inside out. And that's the very reason I want you to have the real samples in the subscription, is to be able to look at the front, and the pieces in your subscription are mounted so that you can easily see the back, because the back often helps you determine the technique used. Okay. And so this is a detail of that same back piece. So again, another one, I think you can more readily identify that. Whoops, let me back up a tiny bit. That this is obviously not a real Min-tsudure piece. Very beautiful, but not Min-tsudure. And this piece, I think, is absolutely incredible. I really like it. It's one of the treasures in my collection, but it's ikat. Okay, the entire thing is ikat. It's beautifully done ikat, has wonderful colors, has some of the charm of the Min-tsudure. It's very lightweight, like Min-tsudure, but again, it's an ikat. And I think once you see the detailing, that becomes apparent. Now, this is the front side, the face side. If we flip this over and look at the front and the back together, you'll see that there's virtually no difference. Okay, the leaf here, for all intents and purposes, is identical to the other. And that, of course, indicates that it's an ikat weave. Meisen, to be specific, but meisen kasuri, which is one type of kasuri. Back again to real Min-tsudure. Here again, you see those outlines, but the outlines in gold in this case, and this is the back side. But if you take a look, you'll see that this gold thread is one thread that's continuing. Now, it may go back and forth a little bit, but it's still one continuous thread. This is the back side, remember. So this gold thread is not jumping over here, floating across the back and forth. As one continuous thread, it's outlining the other islands of color. And here you see from the back a few stragglers when the thread has been clipped because the weaver is through with the gold in that particular island of color. And again, you can see the slats here and there. Here's another slat on the body. The outlines serve to close up those slats also. Here's a larger view of the back of it. And a detail of another section. Again, here are the slits. I keep saying slats, I'm sorry. The slits are very open and apparent here. And so for this section, this is the last slide I'll be presenting. This is one I really like, of these horses gambling. This is a very small piece. The entire piece is only about 8 inches wide. So you can imagine the scale of this. Okay, and this is the back side, and you can see the islands of color, even with these very fine, well, I should also point out, actually, that the lines in the mane are not woven in. Those are actually painted in later with pigment. So some of the very fine, this is such a small piece, some of the very fine detailing has been painted or dyed in. However, the outline in the body is all woven in, as typical of Min-tsudure. And then I should have one full piece. Yeah, this gives you the whole thing of the horses romping around. And again, that entire piece is only about 8 inches wide. Okay, so this gives you a notion of some of the beauty of Min-tsudure. I'll put a link down below I'll put a link down below for the tools that I carry on my website. And I'll also put a link below for the Fukusa program that I mentioned so that you can check that out. Okay, thank you again. I appreciate your patience. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this part of the recording and for the public and go on with my Textile subscription members to answer your questions. Okay, so thank you for joining me.